The original Florida man was likely a prolific serial killer. This man killed multiple people and even a famous female outlaw. He was active from the late 1800s until 1910 and left a trail of bodies from Oklahoma to the Everglades. He used the swamps of Florida to cover up his murders and largely got away with it. Welcome to Morbid Outdoors, the podcast that ventures deep into the shadows of the wild. Here, we unravel the mysteries of missing persons, explore spine-chilling legends, and share the most morbid stories that nature has to offer. From the depths of the dense forests to the highest mountain peaks, we'll uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the great outdoors. Join us as we navigate the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying. So if you dare, grab your gear and let's embark on a journey into the unknown. This is Morbid Outdoors. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. It feels like it's been forever since I have talked to you guys because I previously recorded, did some pre-recording, but we got back from our trip to New Mexico and it was quite the trip. And while on one of our hikes, I actually saw a missing persons flyer at the trailhead. And so I instantly got online, Googled this person, and what a really sad and heartbreaking story. And they are still searching for her. And she's been missing since October of 2023. And so I'll be covering her case over on my Patreon. And if you want to listen, if you want to support me and support the show, you can go join Patreon. You'll get bonus episodes each month and then a little bit something more this summer. When I'm out of work this summer, I take the summers off. I'll be putting out more content online on Patreon. So if you want to hear about this woman's story about being missing in the mountains of New Mexico, head over to Patreon. There are a lot of other episodes as well. And yeah, I'll get a little bit more personal on there and things will be just a little bit more laid back. So I just want to say thank you all for listening. I really appreciate you all for listening and subscribing. And yeah, let's get into our case today. So today we're going to be discussing some crimes that took place in Everglades National Park in Florida. And this is a place that I don't think I've ever been. I might have visited as like a very young child, but I don't think it's on one of the places that I have visited. And so I don't have any personal connections with this park, but it is one of those national parks that either people absolutely love it or they absolutely hate it. And there's usually like not an in-between. So let's start off with negative reviews. So Neil said, as a national park enthusiast who's visited 7 life-changing parks, I am very disappointed with Everglades National Park. No memorable scenery, paid $43 for a boat tour, which was a complete ripoff, only saw 1 alligator and no other exotic wildlife. Was bored to death by this bland park. Lack of activities and complete void of variety lowered the park bar by several notches. So Neil did not like his experience. Jupiter said, I feel very disappointed and completely scammed. Only after having paid $39 plus taxes and having started the trip, we were told that we probably weren't going to see any alligator, no other interesting plants or animals. And, you know, the further we get into this episode, the further you're going to see Everglades has so much more wildlife than alligators. And guess what? You can see alligators at other places besides Everglades. I'm not sure if you guys knew that or not, but hopefully you did. Mike said, very disappointed. I didn't realize the park closed at 6 and I got there at 4. They charged me $25 to get inside the visitor center, then told me that they close at 6. I wish they would have said something at the gate. Well, like I say, Mike, The better you plan and prepare, the better experience you will have. Obviously, since you're leaving Google reviews online, you have access to the internet. So you could have Googled the operating hours for Everglades National Park. Okay, and our last negative review. I most definitely had a horrible time there. The water was murky and we couldn't see anything in the water. The mosquitoes were awful and I couldn't step 1 foot out of my car. I would give it a 0 if I could. I do not recommend this place. So, like I said, people either really love it or hate it. It's not a national park that I've been to, but it is definitely on my list because the wildlife and plants are out of this world, insanely cool. Everglades National Park covers over 1.5 million acres, and it was established May 30th, 1934. Not really as Everglades National Park at first, but then its official establishment was later on in 1947. According to the National Park Service, Everglades National Park protects the southern 20% of the original Everglades in Florida. The park is the largest tropical wilderness in the United States and the largest wilderness of any kind east of the Mississippi River. This is your fun trivia fact of the day. Everglades is the third largest national park in the contiguous United States after Death Valley and Yellowstone. Now, while most national parks preserve unique geographic features, Everglade was the first created to protect a fragile ecosystem. The Everglades are a network of wetlands and forests fed by a river flowing 1/4 mile per day out of Lake Okeechobee, southwest into Florida Bay. The park is the most significant breeding ground for tropical wading birds in North America and contains the largest mangrove ecosystem in the Western Hemisphere. There are 36 threatened or protected species that inhabit this park, including the Florida panther, the American crocodile, and the West Indian manatee, along with 300 species of birds, 300 species of fresh and saltwater fish, 40 species of mammals, and 50 species of reptiles. Obviously, I think we all know that this park has a tropical monsoon climate. So this means summers are long, hot, and very wet, and winters are warm and dry. When the park was officially established in 1947, it became the first area within the U.S. to protect flora and fauna native to a region as opposed to a geologic scenery. So very, very cool reason as to why Everglades was established. And it wasn't for rock formations or anything like that. It was because of the wildlife and the plants, which I find very interesting. I briefly mentioned the Florida panthers, and there's about 160 of them that inhabit the pinelands and the areas surrounding the Everglades. Everglades National Park features 25 species of orchids. Tall cypress trees provide excellent nesting areas for birds, including wild turkey, herons, egrets, anhingas, I don't know what those are, belted kingfisher. Other mammals that inhabit this national park include white-tailed deer, squirrels, raccoons, opossums, skunks, swamp rabbits, river otters, and bobcats, as well as many small rodents. In terms of first people, humans likely first inhabited the southern Florida region from 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. 2 tribes of indigenous people developed on the peninsula's southern tip. The Tequesta lived on the eastern side, and the Calusa, greater in numbers, on the western side. The Everglades served as a natural boundary between these 2 tribes. The Tequesta lived in a single large community near the mouth of the Miami River, while the Calusa lived in 30 different villages. Both groups traveled through the Everglades, but rarely lived within them, remaining mostly along the coast. I have another fun fact for you, and this has to do with alligators and crocodiles. So, you might need this at your next bar trivia night. The Everglades National Park is the only place in the world where American alligators and American crocodiles coexist in the wild. So you've got 2 dangerous species to look out for and watch for instead of just one. And in recent years, I bet you've seen news about the Burmese pythons kind of invading the Everglades. Now, the Burmese python is a non venomous snake native to the jungles and marshes of Southeast Asia. Pythons can also be found in Africa and Australia, and unfortunately, now in Florida. Non native Burmese pythons, gosh, that's a tongue twister, have established a breeding population in South Florida and are one of the most concerning invasive species in the Everglades National Park. Pythons were imported from Southeast Asia by tens of thousands for the exotic pet trade, and escaped pets established a breeding population in Florida by the mid 1990s. Now, currently, it is illegal to import or purchase Burmese pythons in Florida, but this species they've already wreaked havoc on the state. And today, tens of thousands of pythons cover parts of South Florida, including the Everglades and the Big Cypress National Preserve, and they're spreading. So, as we all know, if you know anything about invasive species, now in their native habitat, they do play an important role in controlling populations of prey species. But in Florida, pythons are killing important native species such as songbirds, deer, and alligators at alarmingly high rates. Scientists stated that the pythons caused a recent 90 to 99% drop in the small mammal population in Everglades National Park. And since 2017, Florida has implemented a python action team and a python elimination program to trap and remove pythons from the state. Combined efforts from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and the South Florida Water Management District have removed more than 3,600 invasive pythons from the Everglades since the program began. And I feel like it will become a thing like, hey, it's kind of like rabbits in Australia. We have pythons in Florida and they're not native, and it's really not good for the ecosystem. So I'm just waiting on them to say, hey, if you go out and catch these pythons and give them to us, we'll give you money. Because at this rate, they need they need so much more help and mitigating the pythons in this area. And if this problem keeps happening, of course, we're going to see these, certain species totally eliminated from the area, and that's not good either. And with that, let's talk about someone else who was threatening a lot of the Everglades, beauty and safety. And that person was a man called Edgar Watson. Edgar killed his first man in South Carolina when he was just 9 years old. He had been afraid that the man would tell his father that he had not planted peas correctly and that this would cause Edgar to be beaten by his father. So this is a story, and, because this happened so long ago, is it true? I don't know, but these are the accounts of Edgar Watson. So there are different stories surrounding this incident that he supposedly killed someone while he was just 9. We're not exactly sure why they moved to Florida, but it might have been because either he killed this man in South Carolina or that his mom, she left, his dad left this family, and then his mom packed everything up and took Edgar to live in Florida, where she still had family in the Fort White area. Edgar's dad was incredibly abusive, and as a young man, Edgar began to mirror his father's violent actions by getting into numerous fights that eventually led to, that first murder. As if you know anything about, trauma and cycles, this was just another one of those repeating cycles, and Edgar, unfortunately, did not break that cycle. So Edgar then, spent from age 9 until later on in his life in Florida. And he did marry a first wife, but then she died in childbirth. And while that is extremely sad, it was very common for, the time. Now let's talk about Edward's second murder. This happened in O'Brien, Florida, and this was the story. While making a long-winded speech, his cousin asked him to calm down. Now, remember, we're talking about someone that grew up in a very abusive and household and was traumatized and was physically beaten and who knows what else. And so apparently Edgar was making a long-winded speech and his cousin asked him to calm down. Now, I've been asked to calm down before, and that's, if you know anything about emotions and how the brain works, just telling someone to calm down is not going to help. In fact, it usually makes things worse. And unfortunately, when his cousin asked him to calm down, Edgar responded by kicking his cousin in the head, and then he left him for dead. Am I trying to victim blame the cousin? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I just find it a little ironic that, even back in the late 1800s, people were saying to just calm down, calm down. And we're still doing that today, and it's not helpful. So he kicked his cousin in the head, and his cousin died. And so Edgar had to flee, and he fled to Arkansas or Texas, where he eventually met the famed female criminal Belle Starr. Fun fact about Belle Starr, I only knew of her story because of a very awesome antiques or like flea market area. It's called Belle Starr Antiques, and it's in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Shout out Belle Starr Antiques. The owner is awesome, and actually in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas, where I'm not from Northwest Arkansas, but I'm from Hot Springs, Arkansas, and in Northwest Arkansas, you can actually hike to a cave that Belle Starr used to hide out in, and it's really cool. It's like called Belle Starr Cave. So anyways, if you've ever heard of Belle Starr, great. If you haven't, I'm going to give you a little rundown of who she was and why she's significant in Edgar Watson's story. Belle Starr was born Myra Maybelle Shirley in Carthage, Missouri on February 5th, 1848 on her father's farm. She received a classical education and learned to play the piano while graduating from Missouri's Carthage Female Academy. When her father's farm and inn were burned during the Civil War, she left and became involved with different criminal gangs. She committed horse thefts and robberies in both Missouri and Texas. She was married several times, and with each marriage, she seemed to switch gangs when she switched husbands. In 1883, she, along with her current husband, Sam Starr, moved into Indian Territory, which was in the present-day Oklahoma. While there, the two were arrested for stealing horses by U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves. Cool fact, Marshal Reeves was the first Black deputy marshal in Missouri and married to an indigenous woman. Belle Starr was convicted, and she served 9 months in prison. But on February 3rd, 1889, Belle was shot and killed in Briartown, Oklahoma. She was riding home from a dance when she was shot twice by a shotgun. One version was that Edgar J. Watson had asked for a dance, and when she declined, he followed her and killed her. Another version has it that Watson was afraid she was going to turn him in as an escaped murderer from Florida. So, this is just a couple versions of the story. No one really knows who killed Belle Starr, but honestly, I would not be surprised if it was in fact Edgar Watson. After Belle Starr's murder, I think he was arrested and charged but not convicted of Belle Starr's murder. And after that kind of kerfuffle, he made his way back to Florida. Part of the reason why he went back to Florida was because he was suspected of other murders and assorted skullduggery in Oklahoma and Arkansas. And he returned to Florida in 1891. And at some point, he turned up in Arcadia and was arrested for killing Quinn Bass. But in this trial, a jury acquitted him. So if you're keeping count, we have just surpassed murder number 4. It seems like everywhere Edgar goes, there's always murder or some other shady criminal activities that go down. And in his 5th murder, He got into a dispute in Columbia County in Florida with a man named Sam Toland, and Edgar shot him. And again, he was acquitted, but the sheriff, whose name was J.A. Bethia, that sheriff ran him out of town. He knew that Edgar was kind of good for nothing, trouble causer. And so after that, and he was acquitted of that murder, the sheriff was like, all right, your time for you to leave, basically. Leave my town, get out, because he didn't want to deal with Edgar's murderous, spree anymore. And it's like not a spree because it wasn't happening very quickly, but everywhere Edgar went, someone turned up dead. Now, in 1892, he moved to the 10,000 Island chain in southwest Florida, where he bought a claim on the Chatham Bend River in Monroe County. It seemed like he was kind of starting to turn a leaf and to not be as much of a criminal anymore. And on this claim, he raised vegetables, buttonwood trees for lumber, and sugarcane. And as we all know, back then, I think the Everglades were a really good hiding out spot. A lot of people do that in Alaska, but Edgar chose to do it in the Everglades, and it was the perfect place for him to hide out in plain sight. He also acquired land that would later, in 1923, become Collier County. As he prospered in this business, he sold his produce in Fort Myers, Tampa, and Key West, transporting it in his 70-foot schooner. On one trip to Key West, he got into an argument with a local resident, Adolphus Santini, and slit his throat. Santini survived the attack, and Watson paid him to drop the charges. So this guy, he's like he's psychotic, right? He's going around shooting people, kicking people in the head, murdering a lot of people, and he's somehow able to get out of it. He was acquitted twice. He paid off this guy that he slit his throat to drop the charges. I mean, this person is extremely dangerous and was wreaking havoc on Florida and Arkansas and Oklahoma. But honestly, the worst is yet to come with him. With his increasing wealth, he purchased and homesteaded more land in the area, including acreage on Lost Man's River. Labor for his farms were recruited from Tampa, Tarpon Springs, and Key West. And Edgar generally hired men with no families. If you can see where this is going, then you know true crime. Rumors began to spread that he never paid his workers. And when they asked for their pay, he would simply kill them, bury them in shallow graves, or just dump them in one of the river tributaries. They were outsiders to the area and no one knew their names. And of course, this is not the first time that someone has done this. And it's just creepy that he wouldn't pay these men and would just murder them and then dump their bodies for the swamp creatures and the animals to basically take care of. On one occasion, a young boy told a group of farmers and clam diggers that he had seen Edgar kill a local woman named Hannah Smith. The boy took the men to where Hannah was buried and her body was recovered. Decades later, Lee County fishing guide and novelist Randy Wayne White used Hannah Smith as one of the characters in his books. So, I couldn't find any confirmation that Edgar was the murderer in this situation, but this would make murder number 6 for Edgar, and so I'm not surprised, and it probably was him, especially when it comes to a young kid. Kids don't really have a reason to lie. And when more bodies began turning up, no one knew where they were coming from and who they were. These bodies are showing up in rivers and swamps and kind of seemingly out of nowhere. No one knows who they are. And we all know that it was Edgar. So I think everyone suspected Edgar and no one really could do anything about it because there was not a lot of evidence except hearsay. Everything seemed to come to a head when the Tucker family was murdered. The Tucker family was well known in Cocholowski Island area and had grown crops on property around Lost Man's River that Edgar had bought. Edgar told them to get off of his property, and they responded that they would when their crops were ready to harvest. Um, they had been farming there for years, and so they just wanted to harvest their crops and then they would be out. They were all murdered and thrown into the river. So I think it's safe to say that that was likely Edgar Watson. Now, the end of his reign came not too long after. Between October 9th and 23rd, a hurricane struck the area with peak winds at 150 miles per hour that resulted in 101 deaths in Florida. The following day, October 24th, Watson sailed his schooner into the Smallwood store on Chokoslowski Island, where he was confronted by an angry crowd. Words were exchanged, things were yelled, and he pointed his shotgun at the crowd and pulled the trigger, but the shotgun misfired. Before he could draw his other gun, which was a Smith & Wesson revolver, the crowd opened fire and riddled his body with bullets. His body was dragged to Rabbit Key and buried in a shallow grave. 3 weeks later, Walter Langford, who was Edgar's son-in-law and organizer of the First National Bank of Fort Myers, he dug up Edgar's remains and took them to be buried in the Fort Myers Cemetery, located at 3200 Michigan Avenue. And that's pretty much the story of Edgar Watson. He was, I think, as many would maybe say, a maniac. He committed, more than 7 murders. He murdered an entire family, and he would often murder his help and then just dump their bodies in the Everglades. And really, who knows how many more victims that were due to Edgar Watson. I mean, with the crocodiles and the alligators and all of the, kind of those semi-ocean things that like to feed off of decomposing bodies, who knows how many people were actually victims of Edgar's and that we just didn't find anything of because he dumped their bodies in the Everglades. I'd never heard about Edgar's story before until I found it online. There's not a ton about it online, of course, because it was so old. But what a crazy life that this man lived. And how insane is it that he murdered so many people and kind of got away with it? I mean, until, these angry townsfolk confronted him. And just think, he's being probably yelled at by like 10 plus people, and he fires his shotgun. I mean, that is psychotic to just fire a shotgun into a crowd. I know it was 1910, but like, damn. So I just think this is another thing of like, everybody was fed up with him, kind of like Richard Ramirez. And that's how Richard Ramirez was brought in. Someone recognized him and a mob formed and they beat the shit out of him. So I guess sometimes vigilante justice works. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that, but I think in these cases, specifically in Edgar's case, he would have just kept on murdering people and getting away with it, it seems like. So now you've heard of the serial killer that made Everglades his home. As always, recreate responsibly and remember, sometimes the great outdoors aren't always great. Thanks for listening to Morbid Outdoors. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. It's free, easy, and it helps us out immensely. When you subscribe, you get updates on our latest episodes, and it also boosts our visibility, making it easier for other curious souls to find us. Another great way to support Morbid Outdoors is by leaving us a review. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, a quick review helps us know what you love about the show. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Morbid Outdoors Podcast. You can email us case suggestions and your campfire stories at morbidoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for the support, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks for hanging around after if this is what you like to do and just hear about, the more personal or travel or hiking related content. We had a wonderful time in New Mexico. We stayed at a resort that's like halfway between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, just right outside of Bernalillo. We did a lot of hiking, and in fact, we got to hike somewhere that I first hiked like 8 years ago when I was in college. And it's such a beautiful place, and it actually shut down in 2020 and just reopened. So, very cool to hike there, even though it has been closed for so long. It is called Kasha Katui Tent Rocks National Monument, and it's on the Cochiti Reservation or Pueblo. And they actually just reopened. There's a new system. You have to have recreation.gov pass reservation. That's the word I'm looking for. And then you have to have a tribal pass from the Pueblo. And I'm saying Pueblo, that is reservation basically in any other state. So it's on the Cochiti Reservation slash Pueblo. And I'm really glad they're doing this because I think since I last visited in 2018, it has gotten very, very popular. And there's been just so many people going to hike it for good reason. It's absolutely beautiful. But also, they don't have the infrastructure there that's required for high levels of tourists and hikers. And so now I think there's like, I don't know how many a day they let in, but it's not a lot. And so we were fortunate enough to plan and have prepared ahead of time to be able to visit and hike there. And it's beautiful. Now, there was someone, a couple in front of me when I was going to check in, and they didn't have reservations. And they were asking the clerk, like, well, what if there's a cancellation? And the guy was really nice and they didn't get upset. But he just said, like, there probably aren't going to be cancellations because we only allow X number of people and people make sure to come and, do these things. And so, and I saw their license plate. They were from Minnesota. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just can't imagine traveling that far and having something on your list to do and then not being able to do it because you either forgot or didn't do a cursory Google search. I did ask the clerk how the new reservation system is going, and he said it's going pretty well. Minus a few bumps and hiccups, but I mean, he actually said it's going really well. And this is just me saying this, but this is good for the tribe. I mean, this is on their land and they need to monetize it. I mean, for real, there are so many tourists and people coming and using this land. And so I'm glad that the indigenous people have worked with the BLM to make the reservation system where it benefits everybody and the land. So I think that was great. It was super fun to hike there. We did some hiking in the Jemez Mountains, and I love New Mexico. If you've never been, you are sleeping on a very, very beautiful and underrated state. So I used to live there for a little bit, but beautiful. It was so nice just to have a week off to not do anything except relax and eat good food. And oh, it was so nice. So, anyways, I hope you guys have a great week and weekend whenever you're listening to this. I can't wait to share more episodes that I have in store. Okay, I'll see you next time.